This is Walden Pond, and I decided to do this project because I live in the area. The Future of Walden Pond, Environmental Assessment 2024. So let's go ahead and do this. So we'll go over this real quick. This is the basic information of the project. If you were looking at the state, the country, the town coordinates, someone reading this is information they would want to know. And I provide a little map right here. I go to this slide, and who is this handsome man right here in the picture? This was very important to my story about this, so I thought I would include none other than Henry David Thoreau. And if you're not from the area, we get like hundreds of thousands of people who flock to Walden Reservation every single year because of a book called Walden. And there was this man who grew up in Concord, who was a bit of a weirdo, kind of like Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was a bit out there he was sort of out there. He was weird. And there's nothing wrong with that. He was regarded as the first really environmentalist very early on. And he bought a cabin, or he built a cabin back then. They didn't buy cabins. And he built it on the reservation, and he stayed there for 2 years while he was writing the novel, Walden, and what would come to be one of the most famous books written to environmentalists in the history of environmentalism. Sort of like Silent Spring. This was the Silent Spring of their era. And I'll just go on to read about this. He came from a family of abolitionists. He came from a family that was a part of the first student protests at Harvard University. So he was very much, just to get an idea of his personality, I'll read you this. Thoreau himself attended Harvard from 1833 and 1837 and failed to get his master's after refusing to pay the graduation fee at his graduation ceremony, if you can believe that. So yeah, that is the man, the myth and the legend, and that ties into everything. Everything is because of what he did. Walden Reservation. This is the big issue and what motivated me to start down this project. I'll read you this. The National Trust for Historic Preservation listed the Minuteman National Historic Park, Walden Pond and Woods, and the Orchard House among America's top 11 most endangered historic places for 2024, over concerns that the proposed expansion of the Hanscom Field Airport would have a negative environmental impact for the surrounding historic landscape. I mean, that's basically the gist of this, and this is from the CBS Sunday Morning News segment from Douglas Brinkley, who's an historian, and I just wanted to read you this. It's a proposal that brings 6,000 private jet aircraft takeoffs and landings a year. And he said, quote, the American people should call for the conservation of the former landfill and demand an immediate cease and desist of the jetport enlargement. No developer has the right to destroy the historic ascents of Concord, which includes the Minuteman National Battlefield of the American Revolution, the former home of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and the place Louisa May Alcott wrote Little Woman. Now, I included this next quote because I thought it put this project into great perspective for how long ago this has been an issue, how far back people have been sounding the alarm. But this is a quote from the Boston Globe from 1941 from a state senator that says, I can't believe that this is the only spot available for an airport. It is 1.5 miles from the center of Concord, and the swamp there has to be drained and the ground filled and leveled. And that became Hanscom Airport. So this is the map right here in Bedford, where Hanscom is, of the proposed 6,000 expansion. All these new hangars that are going to massively increase traffic. And here, right here, is another site. So this is sort of like a double whammy. So we have the airport, but we also have what used to be the Concord landfill. And this is directly adjacent to Walden Pond. And for the past 40 years, it was capped and filled. Well, just recently in the past few years, it's gone up for sale. And now it's open for development because this area is not protected by mass DCR. And a lot of people are up in arms about this. So we have Hanscom expansion, and we have now this landfill expansion where they're proposing some new project developments that directly affect the future of Walden Pond, which is really just a few acres away. Not good. So now we get to the section, what lives at Walden? Now, what are the plant species? What are the endangered species? You would follow a fox across the meadow, running far behind it, losing the track, but finding it again and again. Be quick, says Henry. Okay, so in this class, over the last month, 2 months, man, it's gone by fast, we learned about 2 different areas of study for measuring plant biodiversity, and that was the Shannon Index and the Simpson Index. The best way I can describe it is that the Shannon Index is great for measuring how spread out or evenness or richness of an area is for a plant species, as opposed to the Simpson Index, which wants to know how much of a plant shows up, its dominance, its abundance throughout an area. And I go over a little bit of the history. The Shannon Index was named after Claude Shannon. He was a mathematician. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. And this was plotted down in 1948 and became a serious part of the scientific community. Both methods use transect lines to determine its answer. And then the Simpson Index came a year later by British statistician, I can't even say it, Edward Hugh Simpson. And these 2 men are much more smart than I am, but they came up with this great method, and it's only useful for measuring still life forms, as I put on both sections. And this is a great graphic that I thought just shows you the difference between the 2. So we have one that's spread out evenness and one that's more abundant. So this one, I'll read you this. Area 2 has the same species richness as Area 1, but they have different species evenness. Obviously, the evenness here is much better. So what does that mean? Area 1 has a greater what? Shannon Index, that's right. And we go throughout this. Here's my picture of when I did the line for the transect, and I did it twice. And this was a random spot on the reservation, a few different plants. And I used the same data tables we used in other labs. I came across some ferns, ginger, poison oak, that was fun brushing into, blue wood aster, and I did the calculations. I did it a second time, and wild guinea, mountain laurel, white baneberry. This was both Shannon and Simpson. Now this is showing obviously the quadrat method in a square, just a random spot. Obviously, look at this. There's a huge area. So we got wild ginger, which took up 95%, and some poison oak and white baneberry. You can sort of see the poison oak here. I don't know, but this was all mostly ginger. Wild ginger, isn't that nice? I'm hungry for ginger ale now. This is showing some more trees now. And it's very hard, obviously, to measure trees with transect because it's over such a large distance. But we do know that the most popular trees, and I made this graphic in Photoshop from old cartoons, red maple, eastern white pine, red oak, eastern hemlock, black birch, and believe it or not, the most abundant tree species on Walden Reservation used to be American elm, but we don't have really elm trees anymore. And then here are the non-native invasive species that you can find there, which is not good. They're a pest, but buckthorn, bittersweet, Japanese barberry, and euonymus. Did I pronounce that right? Then I decided to measure the soil because I want to know what the plants are growing in, and we took some shore sample, and then in the woods. So here's just a picture I wanted to include of the soil samples. We have what I got. Nitrogen's depleted. I found that phosphorus and potash. This is very dry and depleted soil, which I was very surprised by. It was, of course, taken on a sunny day, and I do put that in the description next, in the next slide. Before anyone says anything, I did not forget. It was this acidic soil. It was starting to get acidic, not healthy, which I was surprised by. One of Walden's only endangered species that I could find, and I wanted to include this, was the northern long-eared bat. And Massport actually did a study that showed that there was a significant population of these bats on Sagamore Hill at Hanscom that feeds into Walden Reservation. And a lot of the decline in the bat population in the area was caused by deforestation from projects and development. And I put this right here. The threat of loss of forest from development in Concord and Bedford are very real. Because of this species' strong association with large blocks of old forests, forest fragmentation, logging, and forest conversion, such as clearing trees for agriculture and development, are also major threats to the species. Not to mention direct human disturbance that, might I add, causes white nose syndrome. One of the more interesting things I found about what lives in the area. So here we go now. This is the last part of the project when we did the water sampling. This was done on October 21st, 2024. And the reason it was done on that was because I bought a test kit 2 weeks before that. It came in the mail broken. I had to save up again and rebuy the test kits. I ran out of test kits from my lab. So the weather was sunny. It was 70 degrees. And that's important because if the water temperature is warmer, and it was the water temperature at that time, although I don't include it here, was around 45, 55 degrees. If the water temperature is warmer, then that means that the phosphorus level is going to change. And that's important because when there's a lot of human activity and it's nice and sunny out, hot, what do you get? You get urine from humans because humans urinate in the pond. And I'll show you that in the next slide. And this is a coordinates, dates 1003 between 1021. These were the testing products I used. They were a bit of a variety, but it was basically a pond testing kit from API, which I really like. I tested for nitrate, nitrite, phosphate, pH, oxygen, and ammonia. I felt these were the most important factors to test for. So we have nitrate test, and it says number 1 because I do it multiple times to confirm. And I was getting 0. And the ideal level that you want is you want closer to 0 in a healthy pond. And I was surprised because I said, oh, this has to be broken because it's just showing up as white, as you can see here. But as it turns out, no. I bought an API nitrite test kit, and it also showed 0. pH, this is interesting. Depending on what day, because I measured it on 2 different days, it was around 5.8 to 6.5, which is not exactly good. It's not 7, it's not 8. You want really a 7 to 8 pH for neutral, 6.5 to 8. And I was getting 5.8 to 6.5 on 2 different tests that I took. I was getting a slight acid to an acid reading, and that's alarming, and it's probably caused by all of the human activity. On the days where it was nice and sunny and there were more kids playing in the water, I imagine that probably changed the pH. Now this is a doozy. Here we have the phosphate, and I got 1 part per million. And in Photoshop, I took out a cube and I color matched so that you can have an easier time tracing the color back. And I got 1 parts per million. And the ideal is less than 0.3. So this is really interesting. I was like, why is this happening? Why is it getting polluted? I go into that in the next slide. There is a big P problem in Walden Pond. There really is. And this is the primary factor of the high phosphate rating, which is not conducive to a good life for fish. It causes algae overgrowth, plants to die off. It's not good. But we have a very high phosphate rating for what it should be. Oxygen level I tested was good. It was around 10 parts per million, which was also strange because usually I associate higher phosphate levels with bad conditions and lower oxygen levels, but thankfully this was not the case. I tested for ammonia just in case with 2 different tests to confirm that it's 0. So I was wondering, maybe with the all of the people in the water, there might be some ammonia. No. And then last but not least, I tested the turbidity with our card, and it was perfect. It was very clear. But as I say in other slides that are coming up, Clarity is not the best indicator for the health of a water. It's just one aspect. And here we go into it. This is a guy swimming in Walden Pond. There's a whole group of people that love deep swimming out in the lake and they dive. But we have here, and I'll read this, more than half of summer phosphorus on Walden Pond is attributed to urine from humans swimming in pond. And I got that from, I cited in the end from a CNBC article. But scientists actually conducted an experiment, and they found that during the winter months and spring, before people really go into the water, the phosphate levels are back to normal. And then when people go back in the water, and a lot of people, they detected urine levels that were rising the phosphorus. I wrote down some more observations. Pond is starting to become moderately acidic. If trend continues, it will become unsuitable for fish. Oxygen levels are clean. Turbidity indicates very visible. Clear water is not always a good indicator of healthy water. What are we doing to combat this? What is something that Mass DCR has done? Mass DCR is like our parks and recreations. So what have they done? It turns out when you go into Walden Reservation, you can read all about it. They have a plaque. In the early 1970s, they had major flooding, flash flooding problems that was causing great pollution, including phosphate, to end up in the river. In the early 70s, Franklin Institute with the EPA tried to develop what is called permeable pavement, and that's like it sounds. Permeable pavement is pavement that can breathe, and it lets rainwater not cause flooding and erosion and pollution runoff. And they perfected this in 1977. And I have this quote right here. It says, "The project was deemed a success and to this day has provided many benefits. The local water table has increased since the time of the project, and there has been a notable reduction in erosion, pollution, and the need for winter road salt. Many other porous pavement projects have been applied over the years, and there is even a high likelihood that you have driven on or parked on one of these projects." That was from Mass DCR. And last but not least, we have the air quality report. And there's a good old picture of Snoopy. Let me get a drink of water here. Snoopy, Snoopy. I included this graph right here. I thought it was pretty good. It's from the Garland, Texas environmental website. It shows the different levels and what problems it can cause. And it's good to resort back to this. Here is the mean, median, daily mean, PM 2.5 average. I put the average line. I made these graphs in Excel like I did last time with the dates, and I labeled it parts per million. Now, if you look back in this graph, what is considered moderate? 51 to 100. At peaks, this is reaching around 30, a little over 30, which is not huge, but I go into later in the next slide why that's a problem, and it has to do with plane pollution from the exhaust, which is a huge particulate concern. So right now, it's starting to get close to moderate. If we continue on this trend and it's getting worse every year, and I look back, it's not going to be good news. However, the next slide is the ozone concentration. And this is very surprising to me that this would be happening. I guess because Concord is sort of closer to Boston than where I live in Chelmsford, where the air is always good. But we're having, most of the year it's around 0.5, 0.6, 0.7 with the average around here. So we're running into moderate high yellows, almost unhealthy for sensitive groups. We're getting close to that during the summer months. And that's not good. And as we increase carbon emissions, combustion from carbon sources, we're now contributing to ozone. It's going to get worse. And if we're talking about adding 6,000 takeoff and runoff every single day from 6,000 new planes, this is very alarming. Not very alarming yet, but I mean in the future, it could be very alarming if we don't reverse this trend. And I put right here, reaching close to unhealthy during spikes, moderate for most of the year. High yellows during the summer, if you just took right here, not including this area. And I find that surprising. And then here you can see, what does airport pollution, how does that contribute to PM pollution? Aviation is a primary source of PM pollution around airports. A significant share, 14%, of aviation PM emissions occurred during the relatively short landing and takeoff cycle, and PM emitted by aircraft spread in a larger area surrounding airports, which is where Hanscom Airport would be, compared to road transport PM emissions from when you're traveling. This is really frightening because the short landing and takeoff is where you get the majority of your PM pollution. And that's basically our concern for expanding the airport right there. Long-term exposure talks about the issues: asthma, respiratory and heart conditions, coughing and difficulty breathing. And we have some sources right here. And to wrap it up, I thought I would include a quote from Thoreau himself. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." Henry Thoreau. That's a beautiful quote. That's one of his most famous lines from that book, Walden. And then we have the citation. So thank you for watching. I know it was a little longer than expected, but that was only because I wanted to spread out the pictures and everything. It's near and dear to my heart. So I hope you liked it. Thank you for watching.